Welcome back to the On3 podcast. We are back with myself, Salvi. We got my co-host, Naveed, who is here today actually. Not as, technically he's still a co-host, but today he's more so the subject of our podcast. This amazing, intelligent, beautiful human being.
Oh, that's what we're labeling me as? Okay, all right.
So I'm going to let Naveed do a proper introduction of himself. We've done 10 episodes together so far.
Yes.
And we haven't really gone too much into what Naveed or I do yet. My one maybe coming in the future. But for today, Naveed, why don't you take it over?
All right. So this is me as the interviewee and I guess co-host as well. So for those that don't know me, my name's Naveed, and this is me officially going on record saying I'm a CPA. This episode is going to be about the profession of a CPA, accounting. So for the people don't know what a CPA is, a chartered professional accountant. That's my designation. I stand by for now almost for 7 years. And essentially I'm in the accounting and finance profession. Yeah, where did that journey begin?
So the interesting story is accounting was something both me and Naveed dreamed of back in high school. So if we take it way back, bring the Wayback Machine, take it back all the way to 2011.
Grade 12.
So this is when we're still deciding, hey, should we go into sciences? Should we go into business? Should we go into some other field? Although our parents would have probably disowned us if we went into any other field.
Exactly. Like what options did we have? Like it was engineer, lawyer, or doctor. And we're like.
Yeah. And so we're like, you know what? We don't want to be the typical brown man going into engineering or being a doctor. Like,
or a lawyer for that matter.
Yeah. Like, who does that? Like, come on. That's lame. That's our 17, 16-year-old brain talking, by the way, not us right now.
Yep.
And then we're like, hey, we want to make money. We want to become billionaires in the future. We want to be successful, own successful businesses. So you know what? Let's go into business.
Just like that. We're like, let's go into business. Didn't know anything about it. We're like, what segment of business? No, let's just go into business.
And also there were other factors that played into it. So a fun fact is me and Naveed actually met in biology class. Grade 11 biology, my first day in my new high school when I moved to Toronto. There's an empty seat beside someone. The professor at the time, she's like, hey, take that seat. I take that seat. And lo and behold, it's a
rest is history.
12-year friendship right there.
Grade 11 biology. Take that in.
And Naveed thought I was a weird kid at that time. At least on the first day.
I don't know about weird kid, but he was 6'3". He's still 6'3". So seeing someone at that height at grade 11, and that was that.
But so we took sciences together. We had biology. We took physics. We took chemistry. And let's just say it was it beat our ass pretty good.
Should have kind of gone into computer engineering at this point, but that's a different topic for another day.
So we were like, okay, we're getting these high 90s in like all these business courses.
Let's clarify that he was getting high 90s.
No, you were getting high 90s too.
Okay, my dad's watching the podcast. I'm kidding.
And so we're like, okay, let's go into business. Okay, now we're going into business. And while deciding, okay, what business do we want to get? Mind you, at this time, we still don't really know all the different kind of sectors within business.
Exactly.
We don't know about accounting. We don't know much about finance. We don't know much about marketing.
HR. That's in business.
Whatever other thing you can set up. So, but we both took accounting.
That's right.
And then when you're taking accounting, I think as part of the CA at the time, recruitment campaign, chartered accountant, which is different. I mean, it's not different, but kind of different, which Naveed's going to get into in a bit. So we get that recruitment pitch, and the recruitment is basically CA, rule the world.
Sold. This guy, I think it was a guy, I think he used to be an alumni at that school. He came and he provided an information session. They handed out brochures, and it was as advertised, CA, rule the world. And then they went into like different things about the profession. They spoke a bit about the profession, but the thing that sold us was like, he's like, you know what? You complete this designation and you go about it, minimum $65,000 to $70,000 starting salary. And we're just like,
At that time, $60,000 to us is a lot.
And you know what? It was a lot. I mean, in retrospect. And there was just something about it. There was this power associated with being a chartered accountant, just that the way they sold it. And it's like, once you become a chartered accountant, your opportunities are endless. It's almost 90% of the people that's turn into a CA, they're never really within the accounting field. They segment into like various industries. And then they popped up like, some of these prominent figures that were
at that time. Wasn't it the CEO of Rogers who was also a CA?
Exactly.
I forgot his name.
Yeah, but they basically outlined all these top executives and big people in different industries that were CAs, and they're like, yeah, this is the way. And just that whole rule the world thing, that actually got to me.
Whoever came up with that tagline for CA, I hope they got a raise or something, because that one tagline, it's like, Nike just do it, or Adidas impossible is nothing. They had CA rule the world. And I'm like, I want to rule the world, of course.
Yep, we just compared CA, chartered accountant, to Nike and Adidas. Wow. But that's what it was. It gave you a lot of optimism about what's to come, right? And like, you could have a future where like you can be really anything that you wanted, but you can start off with this. And I think that's what the pitch was for me, which is like a safety net, security, but endless opportunities. I'm like, well, this sounds fucking great. I don't have to study 8 years in medical school, right? Yeah. Engineering, that's kind of off the charts for me already. And I'm like, accounting.
Yeah, and I think that was the selling factor for my parents, because when I told my parents I'm going to go into business, obviously there was a big disappointment in their faces.
Really?
Yeah, they wanted me to go into sciences, become an engineer, a typical brown man path. So I was like, no, I want to go into business.
Yeah.
The thing about business is, like, other than finance and accounting, I would say most of the other, I guess, industries need your soft skills more than your technical skills.
Exactly.
And there are like a lot of other skills that go into it, but soft skills are very important.
Yeah.
In accounting and finance, it's more so your technical skills. It's where you actually work with numbers, or so that's what we were thinking at the time.
Exactly.
And that's what our parents are also thinking, that it's more secure. You work with numbers. Yeah. Accounting is a respected profession all over the world.
Exactly.
So when I tell my dad, okay, I want to go into business, and then I tell him, hey, CA rule the world. My dad's like, okay, fine. If you're going to accounting, sure, you can go into business. My mom still wasn't convinced. To this day, she ain't convinced. To this day, she's like, why?
Well, clearly she had some insight in there.
No, but that being said, the reason they had CA rule the world is because the accounting profession does have a lot of merit to it.
Yep.
And I think that's something we're going to get into very shortly. But that was our thought process at that time of going into accounting, what motivated us to get into accounting.
Yeah.
And studying accounting in high school turned out to be very different than what you actually learn.
100%
later on when you get into undergrad.
Yeah.
So how was it for you?
No, let's just walk in through to our high school experience with accounting. As you mentioned, accounting in high school was super technical. It was one of those courses where you just studied the material, not a single interaction outside of the paper in front of you. Mm-hmm. That's what it was. You could pass that entire class. You could excel in that class. It was like math. It was essentially math. Like there's no other component to that class other than studying the material you had at hand, excelling it, and writing your test.
Let's just say there was no gap in the knowledge.
Wow. And he's not even the CPA. So that's
GAP, GAAP for
generally accepted accounting principles. But yeah, that was a complete shocker for me because, I have a lot to say about that. But when I had that built up knowledge from high school and then translated into, so for everybody out there, I went to McMaster for an accounting and finance program. I think it was earlier in its inception in terms of how they structured that program, that an internship program and all that. But I had a shock when I went to university, essentially, with the whole accounting and finance realm. Why? Because it was not about the technical knowledge at one point. And that's where the whole business acumen side came in. As I progressed throughout university, what quote unquote became more important was the soft skills. It was not only excelling in your classes and all that stuff. There was all these other classes where there was elements of group collaboration, presentations, case writing, and, reflecting on what quote unquote might be key success factors for people going into the ventures of an accounting profession and wanting to become a CPA. It was not only the technical knowledge that you had, but being able to pair it with quote unquote your business acumen. And that's kind of what I, observed and reflected on throughout my university experience.
Yep. So spoiler alert, I went into accounting for an undergrad as well, but I didn't stay in accounting. So a little bit of a spoiler right there, but my undergrad experience, very similar. You get into, so I went to Schulich School of Business with for a specialization in accounting. The first 2 years, you don't really specialize. So the first 2 years when you're learning accounting, at least in my school, it was a lot of the same things you learned in high school. But then when you get into third and fourth year is when shit hits the fan. Like, not even joking. And at that point, I realized, I feel like that's when you really realize, okay, what I thought accounting was and what it actually is are very different.
Yeah.
And now you're at a point where you're actually having to evaluate for yourself. Is this something you want to continue with? But before we move much further, Naveed, as someone who is still an accounting professional to this day, why don't you explain very briefly what is accounting? Let's say a high school student is watching us, and they're trying to decide what they want to do in the future. What does accounting do?
So accounting and CPA are, I would say, two different things in my opinion. The field of accounting is essentially everything and anything to do with numbers. You can do it from a historical perspective, present perspective, and a future perspective. It's all about being able to tell a story with numbers. And that's what essentially a CPA does, which is a bit different than accounting. Accounting is, I would say, the process of inputting data into a correct and appropriate manner, which makes for, any sort of financial records, whether it be in the form of a financial statement or any other sort of material. CPAs, chartered professional accountant, at a very high level, what they do is they take that data and they be able to tell a story with it. And I think that's where they add value.
So accounting is extremely important.
Yep.
Let's just put it this way. There are no companies if there is no accounting.
Exactly.
There are no financial records. There's no stock market. Maybe there is, but it will be an extremely unreliable stock market.
Yep.
Accounting is the checks and balances of the whole corporate world, and not just corporate, even government. Any kind of business that has money going in and out, accounting comes into play. And without accounting, there's no accountability.
Oh, accounting and accountability. Wow.
I'm pretty sure that's where the word comes from. I just thought of it here right now, but I have a feeling that's where the word comes from.
That was music to my ears. But it's, if you really think about it, it's one of those few professions. I mean, it could go for other professions as well, where it's you're basically playing within a controlled environment. There's all these regulatories and bodies that are governing, and you have to kind of play within that environment. So not only do you have your profession from a technical aspect, but you're playing a game that is officiated, essentially.
Exactly.
And that's essentially what a CPA is, a player in a game where there's all these referees and you got to play within those boundaries.
So what is the meaning of a chartered professional accountant as opposed to a bookkeeper?
As opposed to a bookkeeper. Oh, that's a good question. And I think it's quite evident as we, progressed, as I progressed throughout high school and especially university, I was able to clearly make that identification. So for anybody out there that is going into the accounting or finance profession, you'll clearly be able to identify the distinction, especially early on in your career. Most entry-level positions, they kind of cater to that bookkeeping and clerical aspect, and that's kind of how you see your growth in the accounting profession if you stick with it. Most entry-level positions, they're that of bookkeeping and clerical, so you have more operational or financial transactions within the system. You operate within a certain boundary. You're not at the analytical component yet. What you're really doing is what you really learned in high school. You know what an asset is, you know what a liability is. You're putting things into a system and making sure everything, quote unquote, balances. And that's essentially the purpose and the scope of a job for that of a bookkeeper and a clerk. Where you get into a CPA is now you have all this data. What do you do with it? What is it saying? And that's where the whole analytical component comes in, judgment kicks in, and decision-making, most importantly. And those three elements combined is essentially what makes, I think, well, a CPA. And that's the distinction between that and that of a bookkeeper.
Nice. So take us through your journey after undergrad, because spoiler, again, as I mentioned before, I stopped pursuing my accounting journey at the end of undergrad. So I don't have much view on what goes on past that.
Yeah.
But you do. You're a successful CPA. Take us through what happens after.
Fun fact. I mean, just generally speaking, that CA rule the world, that whole gimmick that was provided, I kid you not, the way it sold our class of 2013 was just incredible. I think almost 50 to 60% of our class not only pursued accounting, but they wanted to be CAs at that time. Mm-hmm. And I think everybody went everywhere and anywhere just to get that accounting profession designation in. I went to Mac, went throughout university. I chose not to participate in the internship program. I did a couple of summer internships just to graduate on time. That was my personal preference.
At Mac, you mean McMaster University?
That's correct, McMaster University. And, I never thought, most people within the accounting profession, it's kind of, I guess, normal practice to envision yourself in the bank industry, in the insurance company industry, and most importantly, the Big Four, being the main accounting firms that operate within Canada. They used to be the Big Five, but that was my vision as well. I was just like anybody else. I saw all the postings come out. I knew the requirements that they had. I envisioned myself in the Big Four. Long story short, I somehow started working in the public sector, so aka the government. Something I did not envision for myself, something I didn't even know that existed to that scope, so that was kind of neat in the sense that it existed. So I basically was enrolled into a grad program by the name of FORD, which stands for Financial Officer Rotational Development Program. It's a grad program for CPAs that is sponsored by the federal government. They have it at each level of government body. So I was fortunate enough to get an interview with the federal body within that program. Long story short, it's a 2-year program. It's asserted with CPA. What it does, it builds all those requirements for you to get your designation from a professional experience standpoint. And after that, you if you maintain status quo in terms of the requirements and the expectations that they have, you essentially progress. It was a big shocker, though. The accounting, quote unquote, that you learned throughout university, this was my experience again, and going through CPA, is vastly different from that on the job. And I mean, you can say that for any job, but I found that throughout university and going throughout the CPA module itself, they were very concentrated on the technical aspect of things, right? Where I felt like throughout university and throughout the CPA program, I could have just studied that whole thing and without a single interaction with anybody, and I would have, essentially become a CPA. And I think that reflecting on that and carrying that into the workforce, it's completely something different. Why? Because when you go into the workforce, guess what happens? You have these things called stakeholders, both internal and external. And you're like, oh, fuck, how do I go about this? They didn't teach me. And that's like things you have to kind of like grow into and whatnot, right? Like the technical aspect is only one thing. Anybody can, quote unquote, give you the right answer when you have, a dedicated amount of time. But to give someone the right answer, the answer they want in the manner in which they want, in which they can, in ways in which they can understand, that's something, I mean, you got to learn.
It's a whole different ballgame. And I think that's a good point to get across, especially for a lot of kids who are in undergrad and waiting to get into the job market, or even who are in high school wanting to get into undergrad. The things you learn in undergrad and the things that you actually do at work sometimes are very different.
Yep.
I mean, sometimes you end up working in fields that are completely unrelated to what you graduated in, aka me. But other times, even if it is in the field that you studied, the nature of the work could be very different than what you studied. So at the end of the day, you'll really learn the most of your skills at the job.
Yeah.
And every job is also different from each other.
Exactly.
Most of the time, you carry there are certain carryover skills that cross over into other roles, but you're going to learn as you're actually in that role. And that's something you just have to have the mindset for. So you never really stop learning.
Exactly.
Throughout your life. It's always, you got to have that mindset of continuous learning.
Yeah. And, that was something that was a predicament for me, because I realized the security that the accounting profession had, but it was kind of a double-edged sword. It is so secure that you almost at one point get into this habit or mindset that quote unquote that continuous learning aspect and upskilling, like, continues to pick up new skills, it kind of fades away because your job is so secure. You get in this routine, and that's where all these norms come from for accountants. We're like, we're freaking boring, day-to-day routine. We have no emotions. Like, I get that. It makes sense. And I really felt that at the beginning of my tenure, I guess, in the public service. I'm not sure if it's a public service thing as compared to a private sector thing, but obviously I started off in the accounting operations side. So as I mentioned before, that's more of not clerical, I would say per se, but it's more transactional elements of accounting as opposed to the analytical. That I kind of got into that after, I would say, a year into my grad program and the public service. So that was something for me. I got almost a bit too comfortable, and I'm like, I feel like I'm almost capped out. And this was just within the first year. And so it kind of clicked. I'm like, for me to keep quote unquote growing, not only professionally, but within this profession, I have to have that continuous mindset of, willingness to learn. And these are some of the words that I'm going to throw out that might not be associated with accountants and quote unquote CPAs, but I believe this is what the future of CPAs will look like. And again, I'm no means like, someone's that's 10 years deep into this profession, but it's just my opinion. Things like creativity, things like, empathy and collaboration. These are not words that you necessarily associate with the accounting profession, but I think these words were something that I had to put greater emphasis on because of quote unquote where I was within the first year of my grad program, and to put myself in a mindset to continue to grow within that profession.
That's awesome. And you got to do that in every single profession.
Yeah.
And if you're not growing, it becomes monotonous.
Exactly.
At one point. And I feel like as humans, we always like growth.
Yeah.
Trying different things, bettering ourselves. So within the accounting profession, what are some different pathways that people can take?
Yeah. Oh, great question. Yeah, so I think I can kind of allude to the path that I've taken and some of the things that
I know one of the biggest ones.
Yep.
And this was all the rage when I was in Schulich. It's Big Four auditor.
Big Four auditors.
Get into auditing and then try to get an internship at PwC, KPMG, Deloitte, or EY. Can't forget my guy, EY.
Yeah.
And that's what every networking event, every class, your conversations in the hallways, it was all about the Big Four. And I think Schulich is considered one of like the accounting schools in Canada. I feel like most students who go into Schulich, their goal is to get into accounting.
Yep.
So that's probably why I was even more sick and tired of accounting at some point, because I'm like, man, how much accounting can I possibly take at this point? Like, I don't want to.
Yeah.
But yeah, so that was the pathway that I find most Schulich students wanted to take. What are some other pathways?
Yeah, I mean, at a very high level, 4 different business lines or various segments of accounting that people were able to identify in their undergrad or even college, whatever avenue you took. There was audit, good old audit. They called it assurance as well. There was tax, good old freaking tax in Canada. You can't get enough of it. And the third was management accounting. I still really don't know what that is, but it's essentially accounting in the internal stakeholder world. And then fourth, this is the one where I think, people that were ahead of their time, not ahead of their time, they saw what the world was coming to and the needs and the demands of the world, and that was consulting. Yep. And those were the 4 various business lines that were introduced to us for accounting. And just like anybody else, I was quite intrigued of audit. And the reason for that was just because of the supply of the jobs, right? Everything was catered towards it. They had this whole plan for you when you came in. I never got a chance to work in audit, but I had friends, and individuals that I knew of that were in that world. And let's just say their hours were next to, I don't even know, like med school hours. I don't know. It was crazy. It was like 50 to 60, 70 hours per week. And they just kind of put you in that cycle. But you know what? I will always say those first 2 years that you spend right after undergrad, operating under the assumption that you get into one of those asserted CPA programs, amazing experience, because everyone's the same age, similar goals. You have mentors that have been through that, alumni, and then most importantly, you got those executives at the top that are showcasing that leadership within that respective business line. And I think it's a great environment to be in and to start off with. It definitely gives you that push, because there's a reason there's a turnover after 2 years, because I guess people feel that burnout, but within the first 2 years, it's a full go.
Yeah, I've heard stories of people who have, like my friends, even during internship, if it was busy season, oh man, you're working until 10, 11 at night, sometimes staying the night.
Yeah, they had this, I don't know if this exists for other entities, but they had literally this thing called a blackout season, and it used to be like 3 to 4 months, depending on your business line, whether it's tax or audit. You're not going home.
You're not going home.
You're not going home. But hey, you get reimbursed for almost everything, but you're not going home.
You practically don't have a life.
Yeah.
It's just grind time at that time. You're just grinding, trying to make it as big as you can. Interestingly, my life could have been very different, because I did interview for Deloitte for audit.
Yes, you did.
For audit. And I pulled out, I think it was the second interview, and I pulled out the line, Mamba mentality, during the interview.
Wait, you getting interviewed by Deloitte or Los Angeles Lakers?
So I think they probably asked me some question about like, okay, what are your strengths or whatever.
Mamba mentality?
And I said, I'm always like pushing through. I never give up. It's all about Mamba mentality. And I think that's when they were like, yeah, nah, we're not taking this guy. But now I think about it, I'm like, Mamba mentality probably changed the whole course of my life, because I said that. Because if I had actually gone into Deloitte, I'd be in a whole different ball game right now.
Yeah, and I don't know if Mamba mentality would have carried you to those through years of those audit.
Well, I was playing Kobe everywhere I could.
God damn. Really?
Yeah.
Interesting.
But yeah, so how have you, now that you are a public servant within the accounting space, how have you enjoyed your life?
Oh yeah, so you kind of asked the question, like, what is it to accounting when you get into the workforce, right? So like most people, the first, I guess, position of entry within accounting or the accounting profession as a CPA is at the operational level. You have everything pertaining to the system. So that means recording transactions, making sure everything reconciles and balances. And then you get into the second tier of accounting, which is called financial planning and analysis, FP&A. And that's where you kind of get into the analytical side of things. Now you're working with a whole annual year worth of reporting. You got your interim periods where you report on a monthly basis, quarterly basis. Not only are you reporting and trying to make sense out of numbers or data and telling a story, you have an audience now, whether it's internal stakeholders or external stakeholders. That is another element of your job. And that also, I think, all constitutes within the aspect of FP&A. I was fortunate enough, actually, in the public service to get offered an opportunity where I leveraged quite a bit of my technical knowledge that I derived from the CPA program and my undergrad, which is essentially analyzing business cases. I never thought that entire thing would just come back to my professional work life, and that's exactly what it was. So long story short, within the government, there's projects that go on, right? And within those projects, you seek funding. It's not like the private sector where you just, get funding because you're a for-profit entity. Within the government, you got to justify everything and anything. I don't know how much I'm allowed to speak about this, but essentially there's projects going on and it's a full-fledged business case. It's a project prepared by project managers. What we do as CPAs is take that business case, that book, and tell a story from a quantitative and qualitative perspective. Remember that good old acronym SWOT?
Oh, yes.
Oh, yeah. Oh, look at that. Rings bells. Strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. Yep. Exactly. That whole thing came back, and it was like, wow. And I think that was one thing that CPA program really stressed on, which was case writing, right? Being able to evaluate a problem at hand, not from strictly an accounting perspective, but a
overall stakeholders perspective.
Exactly. Yep.
And I remember when we used to write cases in Schulich,
yeah,
we had to take in every single perspective. What would this party want? What would that party want? Write all that in bullet points.
Yeah.
And then go into, okay, now what do we do?
Exactly.
And I feel like accounting teaches you that, because it's never just one party that's party to whatever you're doing.
Exactly.
There are so many factors, so many interests in play, so many conflicts of interest even. Exactly. And you have to be in the middle of all that and reconcile all that to come up with a proper plan.
Exactly. And I think that's the great thing about numbers and data associated with the accounting profession, which is that the same numbers and data can be told in multiple different stories and avenues depending on who your audience is, because each audience has their own need and what they bring to the table. And that's something that's very prevalent in the public service. There's many stakeholders and each have their own needs. So when we're presenting, quote unquote, our recommendations or suggestions in relation to a business case or a project at hand, we got to be mindful of the fact of what each audience is bringing to the table and being able to cater the right solution to them. So that, quote unquote, is investment management. Now, that's something I reside in right now. It's nothing comparable to that of private sector in terms of what investment. That's a whole different ballgame. But that's one facet of accounting that one could go into as well.
That's very interesting. So within the public sector, in your role,
yeah,
if you are at liberty to talk about it, what is maybe the most interesting thing you've worked on?
Yeah, I can actually speak to that. I hope so, at least. So this, again, may vary a bit from the private sector, but I think the most varied element from private sector to public sector is the consideration to the crown. Essentially, what that means is you're trying to do something that is adding the greatest value to taxpayer. And I'm not sure how much of that is essentially incorporated into a private sector in terms of decision making, but at the public sector, it's the number one priority. It is the mandate. It is the single most crucial factor that is evaluated at every level.
Thank God our government cares about our tax money.
That's what they say, right? But yeah, value to consideration of the crown. You have to incorporate from every aspect, whether it's, I'm going to drop another acronym on you. This thing was called PASTEL back in the day: political, economic, social, technological, environmental, and legal. We got to evaluate all of those elements and be able to tell you which solution or alternative is best value to the crown and the taxpayers.
Say word. So you actually do use those frameworks that you learn in business school.
Yeah. And
because when I was learning them, I was like, yo, this is BS.
Yeah, I'm like, how do we go from like a T chart with debit and credits to being like, oh, now analyze the whole situation? I thought you just wanted me to do accounting. But yeah, no, I think having that facet that I've been able to encounter, quote unquote, value to the taxpayer, that's kind of enhanced, quote unquote, my business acumen, because it's another added element and it has so many facets to it. As I just mentioned, it's not just from a number standpoint, it's the qualitative measures as well, which are laid out by the government that you have to, quote unquote, factor in when you're coming up with a suggestion or a recommendation.
So as someone who's been within accounting for a while,
yeah,
we hear sometimes people are like, accounting is boring. I sometimes think that way too, by the way.
Yeah, and you're not wrong.
Or, as you mentioned, accounting is super secure. There's no adventure in accounting.
Mm-hmm.
Would you say there are misconceptions? And are there other misconceptions about accounting that you want to clear up?
Wow. This may sound like a lot of bias, but I think one of the biggest misconceptions about accounting is just that it's a bunch of individuals that have learned technical knowledge, which they apply in the following manners, which is just crunching up numbers and putting in and recording it in financial statements, which is just a form of reporting. I think that's one of the biggest misconceptions of accounting. I had that misconception as well. I thought that was like, quote unquote, going to be my, like my task or somehow, as I progressed throughout my career. And I slowly realized that is just the start. As I mentioned before, crunching numbers and putting into some sort of formal structure piece, that is only the beginning of accounting. It is just the operational level. It is it's really where you first start applying your technical knowledge. I think what people fail to perceive about accounting is the whole analytical component and the judgment that you require, and subsequently the decision making as a result of the judgment and critical thinking. Like I mentioned before, as you progress through your profession, in the accounting profession within any field or any industry, what's key is you have so many people that are relying on that data, and they want to know what that data means. And that's why a CPA exists. If you see at every any company in any industry, at the CFO level, they'll tell you at the executive level, they need a CPA. They want the CPA. It holds merit, and it still holds merit today, but there's demand for it. And the reason for it is because not only do we, quote unquote, report on the numbers, we tell you what those numbers mean. We tell you what those numbers mean in terms of your own division and department, whether that's procurement, HR, any other specific department that may exist in an entity, but also what it means for the organization as a whole, where you stand today. And one of the also biggest misconceptions about accounting is that we only look at a historical perspective. We report on data that is, quote unquote, backward looking. That is also something that I was able to kind of get exposure to, and it's not really true. Depending on the various facets of the profession that you go into, not only are you looking at numbers from a historical perspective, but what you also do with that historical data is you try to make trends and patterns and try to, quote unquote, forecast and predict what that could mean for the future and your present state. So I think that was one misconception that I kind of learned throughout the years of my accounting profession as I progressed.
I think that just goes to show that the accounting designation, as you mentioned, it has merit. They look out for CPA.
Yeah.
Because it is a very prestigious designation. It's a very sought after designation. And there's a reason the job security is so high there, because of the amount of grit and hard work you have to show to get there. Yeah. The amount of knowledge and skills you gain becoming a CPA, on the path to becoming a CPA and getting experience to a CPA, those are invaluable.
Yeah.
And those are things that every industry, every corporation looks for. No, as I mentioned earlier, no company runs without an accountant / a CPA.
Exactly.
But speaking of that, the merit of the designation, the CPA designation, I've heard some other designations like CMA, CGA, and we started off talking about CA. Well, how did CA become CPA?
So there was a whole plot twist in pursuing this profession. We started off in grade 12 with CA rule the world, and we're making our way throughout university. And then I think there was this day in my third year where just the bomb dropped, where it's like, so essentially there was a 3-tier designation structure within the accounting profession, at least within Canada, which went as follows. You had, I'm not going to really categorize them, just for the fact that you should know CA was at the top. You had a CMA, a CGA, and a CA. So there was a certified general accountant, there was a certified management accountant, and then there was CA, chartered accountant. So they had 3 levels of designations prior to the merger. And essentially, the chartered accountant was ranked the highest out of the 3 designations, just based on complexity and the scope of that designation. And that's what we were pitched with, ruling the world. And long story short, all those 3 designations got, amalgamated into one. And now they called it this thing, by the acronym of CPA, which was just Chartered Professional Accountant. And we're just like, well, like, do I still get to rule the world? Like, what
did you feel some type of way when that merger happened, or was it like, okay, it's whatever?
Oh, at its face value, because I was in third year, still wanting to rule the world and getting through my accounting profession. See, at this point, I'm too deep into it, right? I have to complete it. I have to show something, right, to my dad and everybody, including myself. So I'm like, I'm going through with this, whether it's a CA, CPA, NBA, whatever you want to call it, I'm getting through it and I'm finishing it. But as I progressed through undergrad, completing, once I finished my undergrad and then proceeding into the actual CPA program to attempt the examinations and then proceed to the final examination, that's when I started, quote unquote, networking a little bit. And yes, I did actually network.
Nice.
I got to meet people within the industry, people within the public service, private sector, from various industries that were all three forms of designations prior to the merger. And the understanding that I got was the CMAs and the CGAs, they really benefited from this merger because they just attach this quote unquote new name to their designation. Whereas the chartered accountants are like, well, like, we were the top of the crop. What about us? Like,
what made CAs the top of the crop? Like, was it just the years of training that it required? Skills.
Yeah, so all three levels of designations, they had varying exams. CGA at a very high level, it was called Certified General Accountant. So it focused, it didn't have the same depth and breadth as that of Chartered Accountant, whereas CMA, Certified Management Accountant, focused more on management accounting. And long story short, management accounting is essentially accounting within the internal stakeholder world and not too much of the external stakeholder world. And then you go into chartered accountant, which was all inclusive. It was a comprehensive, but also had a great level of depth of accounting. And I think that's what differentiated it from the other two designations. And that's why it was so sought out.
I can see why CAs might have gotten screwed over a bit, because if you have spent that many years and that many years of extra training and hard work to get to a certain point, only to then have the same, I guess, letters which matter, the designation, as others who had maybe had a bit easier. I'm not saying those are easy.
Yeah.
I'm sure all three designations
just not the same thing, essentially.
Challenges, but not the same thing. I can see why CAs might have been like, hey, like,
yeah,
not
just
cool.
I mean, just take this example. Just imagine if the NBA merged with the EuroLeague. How would that go? It only benefits the EuroLeague. But that's what it was.
I don't know. I mean, EuroLeague players might be taking over.
Yeah, Luka, Oli, and Nikola. We always talk about basketball, but that's kind of the animosity that I felt. And as I progressed through the program, I was able to actually, again, network, and I had people that were quite close in my circle that were actually chartered accountants. They were much senior than me, progressing through my undergrad and the CPA program. And I got to realize that they, as they amalgamated the program, the structure of that program changed as well, for obvious reasons, because now they're incorporating three designations into one. And I'm not going to say that the difficulty, quote unquote, went down, but it did definitely change. It was more comprehensive in nature, but it might have compromised on the depth that was of the chartered accountancy designation. It retains some similar fashions of the chartered accountancy. So this assessment that they have for the CPA, it goes by the name of CFE. It's the common final name.
Gives me PTSD.
Yeah, it's weird. It's like, yeah, it's something within the accounting field, and it's so unique. It's a 3-day exam. Each
3-day exam.
Yeah, 3-day exams, and it's not just like a
madness.
It's not a 1 hour 2 exam. It's a full-fledged 3 to 4 to 5 hour exam each day, and it's like,
man, hats off to you for going through that. And all accountants and all CPAs. That is some crazy level of work ethic.
And that's what it was. Yeah. As I slowly progressed through the CPA program, I realized that going through CPA is nothing. In my personal experience, it is nothing but time commitment. Mm-hmm. you're not expected to memorize the CPA handbook. You are not Mike Ross. You can't do that. You can't memorize the income tax act. You can understand how it works. You can understand where to reference and the CPA handbook. And that's what I slowly started to realize as I took the assessments and wanting to perform better each and every time, because you don't want to fail, obviously. And it was just that. The key success factor in getting through that program from an academic standpoint and passing the exams was just knowing where to, being resourceful, number one, and understanding that you're not required to give the perfect answer, because they're not giving you the time to give a perfect answer. A perfect answer is if you have the perfect scenario, which is unlimited amount of time. Mm-hmm. They're looking for the best answer in the time that is allotted to you. And for that, you have to focus on certain points over others. You have to prioritize, and that's a whole mental ball game within your head. And again, you cannot just do that by memorizing a whole 1,800-page act.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
There's so much dedication that goes into achieving something like the CPA. I would put it on par with becoming a lawyer, becoming a doctor. CPAs are just as well up there because of the amount of dedication and work it takes to get there.
Yeah.
So we've talked at length about the technical aspects of accounting, and going into more of the subjective aspects of accounting, where you're considering different stakeholders and coming up with recommendations based on that. And these were all things that was solely done by a CPA. But our world is now changing. We are in unprecedented times with the emergence of AI.
Yes, sir.
And specifically generative AI, which can do a lot of the same tasks. It can take multiple stakeholders into account and come up with recommendations. We have used it multiple times to do exactly that.
Yeah.
It can analyze data pretty well. So where do you see, in light of that, in light of AI becoming such an emerging force, where do you see the profession of accounting going?
I'll be very blunt and honest. Sometimes I'm scared. I'm scared for the profession of accounting. I think it's a wake-up call for all of us, whether it's at the individual level or as a collective unit. Fun fact for you. So the World Economic Forum, they do a job survey every 4 to 5 years, right? And in the most recent report in 2021, just in the midst of the pandemic, they came out with numbers in which they identified jobs that are on the increase and which jobs are on the decrease. Let me take you on some of the numbers of which jobs were on the decrease. Number one, you had data entry clerks. Number two, you had administrative assistants. Number three was accounting, bookkeeping, and payroll clerks. And number four were accountants and auditors.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
So this is the decreasing list.
This is
jobs that are decreasing.
Yeah, this is the decrease in the number of jobs. And this is at an international level. It's a survey conducted at an international level.
So this is all across the world.
It's all across the world. And I think it was a huge wake-up call for the industry. And what was even more concerning was that the report prior to that, like now we're talking in 2017, accounting and bookkeeping and auditing was at number 7. So that means it increased. But, and I think that's just alluding to the fact that some of these jobs that are in the profession of accounting, they're becoming less and less relevant and they're less and less in demand. But obviously that means we're going to have to adapt and evolve again at an individual level and as a collective unit. But, the good news is you flip that economic survey upside down and the following jobs were seeing the highest increase. And guess what was number 1? Data analysts and scientists. And number 3 was big data specialists. So I don't look at that as everyone needs to become that. I see that more of an opportunity rather than like, our quote unquote profession is, kind of going down the hill and we're going to need to do something. You can see which jobs are trending in quote unquote the right direction or they're trending upwards, right? You can I kind of see that as an opportunity where to date, one of the biggest misconceptions about accounting or the profession of accounting is that, we just crunch numbers and look at anything from a historical perspective. But I think, again, where CPAs add the most value is what they're able to tell from a present perspective and most importantly, what it means going into the future. And I think for the profession of accounting, at least at an individual level, I think some of the things that I tell myself is that for me to quote unquote keep up with the technological advancements, there was a saying that AI is not going to replace physicians, right? But a physician that's able to utilize AI is much better off with a physician that's not utilizing AI. And I think the true same is going to hold true for the profession of accounting.
Absolutely.
Yeah. CPAs that are looking to leverage or upscale their skills. And that's quote unquote the mindset that I have as well, which is that, technical knowledge, it gets changed throughout the course. It's evolution with that, right? And same things goes with your skill. Not one skill is just going to be evident throughout the course of time. You're going to need to continue to learn, right? And I think, gaining credits in like these various areas, whether it's with big data, even introduction to AI. And I think that's going to be crucial for any professional within the field of accounting, including myself. And that's kind of where I hold my head at with that in terms of where the future of the profession is going at. And yep, go ahead.
No, I'll say this. That list that you said of the jobs that are increasing in terms of like data scientists, data analysts, even those jobs, that might have been true as of last year.
Yeah.
But
you think it's gone to another tier now?
No, I think it's gotten, because ChatGPT can do the data analysis.
Yeah.
It has a whole plugin that does, you feed it data sets and analyze the whole data for you. So we're going to get to a point where we don't even need data analysts, data scientists all that much.
Yeah.
So even those jobs that were at the top of that list in terms of growth year over year, that list is going to change significantly, I think, over the coming years. That is to say, even those professions have to learn how to use AI to work with it.
Yeah. Yeah. And, at least in the public service where I reside, I think the perception around it right now is AI is quote unquote, it's perceived as a barrier as opposed to an opportunity. So I think that's obviously going to need to change as we continue to adapt and evolve with that. But that being said, for the sole purpose of what it means to be a CPA, I kind of break it down into 3 buckets, right? In terms of the qualities that come with it. So first bucket of a CPA is what you have is the technical competencies, right? That is a technical and fundamental knowledge that separates you from any other person that does not know accounting. You have that technical knowledge. Then you get into the second tier or a second bucket of what it means to be an accounting professional or a CPA, and that is that you're operating, as I mentioned, in an environment that is regulated, that is quote unquote being monitored and overseen, quote unquote referees. So that's what distinguishes it from other professions, because you're being regulated in that environment. That's the second bucket. And then there's this third bucket for what it means to be a CPA or someone in the accounting profession, and that is quote unquote the human-centric and values that are associated with that. So things like being collaborative, curious, adaptability. And again, I know these terms are not quote unquote what people usually perceive or associate with that of the accounting profession, though. But those are key things that put us above and beyond just quote unquote an accountant, right? And I know you mentioned the concept, not the concept of ChatGPT, but ChatGPT in itself and generative AI and where it's headed. But I still think until that state comes about, there is still a finite window where individuals within the accounting profession that have that third bucket, things that necessarily a machine cannot replicate at the same consistency and appropriateness right now, that's what we need to emphasize on and leverage so that we can not only keep up with the technological advancement, but kind of operate in parallel with them so we both move forward.
Well, very well put. I think, in my opinion, where I see accounting could evolve into in the future while working with AI is take on more of that consulting role.
Yeah.
Because I feel like that's one aspect that's going to be very hard for AI to replace. That, as you mentioned, that decision-making capability, that ability to build relationships with your clients, that ability to take a holistic approach from like a human perspective and advise your clients in that way. And I think that's where accounting could go more and more into towards consulting, where you're consulting companies or people on how to go about their accounts, essentially. So I think that might be where it's heading. But from where you're sitting right now, what are some use cases that you see of AI in your profession?
In my profession, within my industry, it is quite limited. But, just reading up on some of the things that are present within the industry right now, I think AI and the profession of accounting, where they stand out right now, is much apparent at the operational level. So streamlining processes, also at the analytical level. But as you mentioned, that phase of now asking, okay, historical data is important. And I think generative AI has been able to appropriately spit out the results that are of value to various stakeholders in any given industry. But asking yourself, okay, what do we do with it now and with that of the future? I think that's where some of the limitations lie, because I think there's a concept called prompt engineering, and it has nothing actually to do with engineering. I think that's something individuals in the profession of accounting, and most importantly CPAs, I think that's what we're going to need to leverage that concept the most. There's all these tools and great resources such as ChatGPT and other generative AI tools that are coming out. We're going to need to learn this concept of prompt engineering. If we are to work with these technological advancements and proceed with them, we're going to need to learn how they're spitting out their results and how we can work with them to spit out better results, and how we can further leverage and utilize those results to make quote unquote better decision making and solutions and recommendations to not only our internal stakeholders or clients.
Watch that become part of the CFE.
What, prompt engineering?
Yeah.
When I first heard about that word, I kind of got a little a bit anxious, because I'm like, I know nothing about engineering. Little did I know it had nothing to do with engineering. But that's been my limited exposure with AI. I just play around with it. I don't think I've utilized it to the same extent that someone would within the private sector, but I think they're still trying to figure out as well within the accounting profession. And I think it's been a bit slower in our world, in the accounting profession, compared to other industries. And I think the reason for that is just, again, the amount of governing bodies that are associated with it. I think it takes a bit of time for a system that is not quote unquote a human, that is based on certain fundamentals and prerequisites, to be like, okay, this is the answer and this is where we got it from.
Absolutely. So this is, as you very well know, as a co-host of this podcast, this is something we ask or try to ask our guests, which is, if on the other side there was, let's say, a kid listening who is considering whether to go into accounting, or there's an undergrad student who's currently in accounting, what are some advice that you would give them, having, you're not too far out from where they are, but you've gained a good amount of exposure and experience since then. What are some advice you would give them?
Kind of wish I had someone say this to me, but guess what? I've heard it now, so that's all that matters. But I think one clear statement that I would make to somebody that is wanting to go within the profession of accounting, or is at least contemplating it, is that the conceptions and perceived notions of someone in that of accounting, don't limit yourself to that. So it's not just people that are quote unquote that have a routine, that are very analytical in nature, that are attention or detail oriented, that will put you in a mindset to be confined to those boundaries. Accounting is a very secure profession. It is a very structured profession, but it is also a profession that allows you to have endless opportunities. But I think those endless opportunities comes with a mindset of having endless boundaries. So you have to be an individual that has a mindset of endless boundaries coming into a framework which is very defined, but you take that defined framework with your endless limits, and I think you can truly go anywhere. And I'm not going to say you can rule the world. We're not going to
waiting for that tagline.
I'm not going to say rule the world because, well, I'm not at that place yet, but I still strive for it. But all those things like creativity, adaptability, curiosity. I think curiosity is one thing that I've tried to emphasize on as I progress through my professional career. And that, again, it's not associated that with much of accounting, but I try to integrate it as much as possible. And that's kind of where I find my mindset of having a mindset where there's unlimited potential or endless limits.
That is awesome. And no, I do think you can rule the world. And because CPA is also a designation that's accepted in a lot of different countries.
Yes.
So hey, if you want to move around in the future, go get your CPA. Or one of the things you can do is get your CPA. You'll have a job almost everywhere you go.
Hey, I'll tell you one thing, though. This might be a very odd note to end this off on, but CAs and CPAs around the world, they vary quite a bit.
Really?
Yeah. And that is something, again, that I got to know as I talked with literally, I guess, like my cousins or anybody around the world. CPAs, for example, in the UK or in like any South Asian country, do you know how hard it is to get your chartered accountant designation there? It's fucking insane.
Harder than here?
100% just based on pure statistics. Right around, like within the province of Ontario, CPA Ontario, they have their numbers disclosed. Even CPA Canada, the passing rate for the common final exam, which is the last assessment that one has to take to get their designation, it's hovering around the 70 to 75% mark.
Oh, wow.
That's fucking amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you get 3 attempts at it. After that, you cannot attempt a CPA. There are multiple people within the UK and South Asia. I'm not really sure how it works in Africa and other parts of the continent in Asia, but it's super tough. It's super tough. And I don't know what I had to say about that. I feel like it kind of holds it, like the concept of prestige. Like, yeah. And when you talk about the future of the accounting profession, I think in isolation, not accounting for the fact of the technological advancements, one should think about what it actually means to be a CPA now than what it did 10 years ago. I think there's a drastic difference, and that even out of 20 years ago. And I'm not just alluding to like population growth. I think something changed.
Do you have a view into what?
My particular view is that my honest opinion, I feel like the CPA market is a bit saturated. Yeah.
Is that just here in Canada or all over the world?
I can't speak to other nations, but I feel like within Canada it's quite saturated. Because when someone wants to go in the profession of accounting, it's just by default it's gone into CPA, and a lot of people take it. I mean, the barriers to entry are quite limited. It's not that of a med school where you have to go through a stringent like 8-year program. And for some reason I feel like it's a bit saturated. And the reason I say that is because I've seen so many people as you progress through the managerial and executive level. It's like, yeah, CPA is important. You need a CPA, but I think you kind of need to tack it on something else too. I'm not saying that has to be with designations, but that's what I meant with like micro credentials, like getting credentials in other areas and being able to supplement and be more than just a CPA now.
That's very interesting. And I guess that's also part of the evolution of a CPA.
Yeah.
And what you got to do in the future. I mean, just to give a bit of a view on why I switched.
Yeah.
Kind of for some of the things that you detailed already, which one, I could see that the market was getting pretty saturated. Mm-hmm. So I was already kind of like, okay, what's my future here?
Yeah.
2 was also, even at that time, due to technological advancements, there was already discussions regarding where is the future of accounting going. And that also kind of spooked me a bit. And add to the fact that I wasn't particularly passionate about accounting, I was like, okay, maybe I should explore something else. But that isn't to say that what things that we've also discussed, which is if you are passionate about accounting or you enjoy accounting and you stick through it and you manage to get your designation, that the world is still going to be your oyster.
Yep.
It is still a prestigious designation. If you stick through it, you still have worlds of opportunities at your palms, and you can still do so many things from the base of being a CPA. You can branch out of that and do so many other things because you are recognized as a CPA. You've already achieved that level of, prestige and credentials that people are going to recognize. So this is not to put anyone away from accounting.
Oh, for sure not.
My reasons for going away from accounting were a mix of personal and mostly it was because I just wasn't very passionate about it. But if you're passionate about it, stick with it because it's still going to open so many doors for you.
Yeah, very well said.
Anything else, Naveed?
No, just keep being in that mindset to rule the world and you'll eventually get there. I think that's all it is.
Absolutely. So thank you for opening up today and taking us to the world of CA/CPA.
So was I hosting or what?
You're taking a bit of both.
All right, I'll take it.
But had a really fun discussion. Hope everyone else also enjoyed this. And I hope everyone can take tidbits from this discussion and get on to ruling the world at some point. All right. Thank you for tuning in to another episode of On3 Podcast. I have myself, Salvi, aka
Teddy.
We're doing nicknames today?
Yes, we are always.
And I got Naveed, the CPA, who is about to rule the world and also known as Nosy Nav versus Slim Navy. We are tuning out. We out.